Thought I'd do a quick video here about pick guards, making a pick guard, custom pick guard. Got this old no-name whatever it is. It's a short scale base, but it's actually really cool. Some old Japanese Taisco kind of thing. Doesn't have any labels on it, but this guy's got it set up really cool as a kind of a bottom four strings of a baritone guitar. So he's doing it like B-E-D-A or B-E-A-D. And it sounds great as far as it plays great and stuff, but this original pickup is terrible. It was sitting on this original pick guard, one of those kind that just kind of mount to the top. Yeah, it's always so bright. Is that better? Anyway. So we're gonna put this, I had an extra, this kind of Gretsch style pickup that I pulled out of somebody's bass. It's just kind of an import Gretsch style Filtertron, a Fidelitron. So we're gonna put that in there, and I'm making them what is a tortoiseshell guard to go on it. So different size, different mounted pickup and things like that. So we had to mount it down in there. I had to do a little bit of a route to open this hole a little bit for it, and we'll mount it down inside there. So anyway, this pick guard was chipped on the corners and it's just kind of crappy. So we're making a new pick guard for it. So usually how I do that is I'll take, the original, if we're gonna make it the same shape, and I use that as a template, of course. Take my pick guard blank, and what I do is I take a little of this 3M hobby spray glue, which works great for all kinds of things. Just, if you have to back some sandpaper or make a sandy or whatever. So I cut a piece of tracing paper out, generally the size of what I need to do. Then I spray it down with some of this 3M 45 adhesive multi-purpose. And I just, lay it on top of stick it to the top of the pick guard blank. You can see like what I cut out here. And then I can lay this on top of it, and I can trace it, and I can mark all the pick guard holes and control holes and all that kind of stuff if I'm keeping it the same. Otherwise, if I want to move things, I can do that too. So kind of puts this piece of paper on top. Usually your pick guard material also has a little, plastic film on top of it as well. So once I'm all done, I can just peel the plastic and the paper and everything off, and it'll be a shiny, clean pick guard, all ready to go, hopefully. But yeah, you could use tracing paper, you could use some computer paper. A lot of times I use tracing paper because sometimes I'm doing a custom guard and I have to lay this down and kind of tape it to the top of the guitar, and then I can trace, where the pickup routes are, or trace the edge of the guitar body outline, and just kind of use some French curves or whatever if I'm going to do like a custom shape to kind of make it look cooler than the original, or what have you. Then I can pull that off of the guitar, and then I spray it and tape it and stick it to my blank, and then I just I use a scroll saw and cut it out rough, and then I use my bench sander and a spindle sander to kind of clean up the edge, and I can give it a little bit of a bevel with the sander. It's pretty rough, but at least I get it started. And then I use like a plastic file, put it on the edge of a bench or something and file in the bevel. And then to clean the bevel, I can take a card scraper and go around it, and that'll clean up all the scratches. And then I can even take some, really high grit sandpaper, some 400-600 grit, and go around and just sand it and get the little furs off the edge and kind of clean it up. But then, yeah, I can have all this stuff marked. I can drill all my control holes, my pick guard holes. I routed this for the new pickup because I happen to have a template, luckily, for a Filtertron. So I just taped, one of my Lexan templates to it and used my little bearing bit and routed it out. Sometimes that's the tricky thing to do, is try to mark that right where you need it for the hole and things like that. But so that's kind of a crucial aspect of it. If the pick guard screws aren't perfect or whatever, then we can move those pretty easily. But all right, so I'm going to wire up this very simple circuit volume tone jack Never did a demo on wiring really, but I talked about it a little bit on that telly that we did. But I thought I'd do another quick one. So we have two potentiometers, variable resistors. They're the same, 250K. It just depends on how you wire them as far as it being a volume or a tone control. A tone control will have a capacitor going to ground, sending the signal through the capacitor to ground, and the capacitor just kind of acts like a window. It lets certain amounts of high-end frequencies through and nothing else. So depending on the value of your capacitor, the higher the number, the more of the effect it has. The bigger the window, the more high-end frequencies, etc., get passed through it. So this is an 047. A lot of guitars, 022s or 047 MFD is common. And you can play with all kinds of different ones and materials and all that kind of stuff, but this is just a Sprague orange drop. And different voltages. This is a 200 volt. A lot of people like the 600 volts, which they just get bigger and bigger, but it's basically the same value. So if you're an audiophile, you can mess with that all day long. Have all kinds of fun. But, a decent cap upgrade is a good thing to do on a guitar. So I got two potentiometers. These are resistors, variable resistors. And depending, these are 250K, so that's kind of a lower resistance. And then you can go to 500K, which gives you more resistance, and 1 meg, which is like 1,000, even more resistance. And as you go up in numbers, your signal will be brighter and brighter. So the lower the number, kind of the darker your tone will be, even with your volume all the way up or what have you, because nothing is technically all the way up. So how these work is, you usually have 3 lugs, 1, 2, 3. Sorry if you can't see that. And then, the wiper goes around. I just got the back taken off of it. So inside there's a little copper wiper that goes around the track that sends the signal, and this wiper is connected to the center lug. And then as you turn it one way, the center gets connected to one side of the left side or the right side, and as you turn it back, it gets connected to the other side, and then everything in between. So usually your signal on a volume is going in the left and then coming out the center, and then grounded on the right lug. If you're looking down on the back of the pot, oops, sorry, you can see I've got this one bent back, and I'm going to solder it to, oh man, it's so shiny. I'm going to solder it to the back of the cover, because that's all going to be grounded. So that one's grounded, signal's going in the left and then coming out of the center. So as I turn, the variable resistor, as I run it to the grounded side of the track, it's going to just short the signal out basically. And as I move it back, the resistance is going to get greater and greater and greater to the ground. And then when I'm all the way up, it's just going to be a signal in through the wiper and right back out. But you do still lose some signal to ground, because that track is still grounded on the other end. So that's where your resistance comes into play. The higher the resistance to that signal getting around that track and going to ground, you then maintain and retain more of your signal going out to your jack. Therefore, you get a brighter signal. So, single coils or really bright pickups usually use 250 to kind of knock some of the high ends off of them. And then darker pickups, humbuckers and really heavily wound humbuckers, etc., you'll usually use a 500K or even a 1 meg. More resistance so that you retain more of those high-end frequencies when you're all the way up. And they make special pots that actually have a total true bypass on them, so you kind of turn it up to 10 and then you click it, and it gets rid of the track, totally disconnects that resistor from ground, so you don't lose any of your signal. And of course, the more of these you got wired into your guitar, a lot of people just want like a volume control and a jack, because they want as little load as possible on their signal. So they'll get rid of the tone pots and all that stuff, because everything you add to your signal line puts a load on it. That is to say, there's a ground connection drawing some of your signal away. And depending on how much resistance to that ground connection, affects how much signal gets sucked out of your line. So that's kind of the general idea on those, on how a pot is. So sometimes it's good to see what's going on inside there. You can always take one of these covers off and look at it yourself. So we got some brand new CTS 250Ks here we're gonna wire up. And I got this is just like a board that I got from some pre-wire kit or something like that, but I put a couple pieces of wood on it and drilled a couple extra holes, so I got a hole for like a 3-way toggle switch, and then it had the hole for like a Strat style blade switch, and then some extra holes that I put in there so I can load all my components here and I don't have to work on them in the guitar, especially if it's a guitar where you're loading the electronics through the back, in through the top, you know, where you don't have a pick guard. Of course, if you got a pick guard, it's not hard to just use the pick guard to load everything in and wire it and then drop it on the guitar. But I like to do it outside here, that way if I splatter solder or whatever, make a mess, it's all accessible here and I'm not messing with anything. So some wires I'm going to use this shielded, kind of Gibson style shielded wire. Can you see that? For most of the main line all the way to the jack coming out of the volume. And the thing about this stuff is it's cool because it's coaxial. Basically, you got a shield on the outside, which is going to be the grounded end of the signal. And then inside, you've got, you know, your kind of hot lead signal, and it's all shielded, so that's nice for noise issues. But yeah, it's kind of the stuff Gibson uses a lot, and it's cloth inside. So I think we talked about that in that telly, but you can solder. I can solder this right to the back of the pot with my shield coming out, and so it becomes kind of both sides of the circuit all in one wire. You can ground with the outside, and then of course use the inside for your hot lead. And it keeps things nice and neat, because usually a lot of guitars you open them up and Strats and stuff, and they just got tons of wire, you know, a couple feet worth of wire more than they need, and that can kind of create an antenna situation and noise and stuff. So if you get them really locked down, then just using the best possible, the least amount of possible wire, you can cut down on that noise issue. But single coils are noisy, no matter what you do. You can shield the hell out of them, and that's why humbuckers are called humbuckers, because they buck the hum. So yeah, I can run this. This will be my output coming out of the center, and then I can solder that to the back of the pot, which is my ground. I can bring it around, I can solder it to this back of the pot, you know, where this tone control is going to be, and then take it all the way to the jack, and basically I'll just have one wire coming out, grounding everything, and then being my signal output. So I just cut myself, you know, a decent amount, not too much more, but I want a little wiggle room. And that'll be basically my lead. Usually what I do is you can either take on the shielded stuff, you can take a little, you know, center punch or something and unbraid it and kind of create a Y, or you can strip it. Kind of spin it in here, and you know, I don't want to cut through that insulation on the inside, but it'll pop off, and kind of clean it up, or take a little wire nipper, and if there's any little tails that sticking out, I can nip those off and clean it up. And then another thing that's important about this kind of wire is that anywhere it's kind of close to where maybe a hot lead might be, if this wire touches it, it'll short it out and you'll die. Your signal will cut. So using heat shrink, you know, over that in those areas is important, just to insulate it so you don't end up with a short circuit. If the pot spins around or the wire moves or whatever, all it has to do is touch it and you will have no wire or no signal. So I'll run that through there, and I got my soldering iron. I got a 35-watt Weller just plugged into the wall. I don't know, I've been doing that forever and it works great. And we'll start, so what I do is I'll strip all this stuff and I'll get it pre-tinned. So end of this thing. Sometimes there's this cloth on here. You gotta kind of put a lighter on it or something. Burn it off. You can use a lighter or whatever, a heat gun or a soldering iron even to shrink your heat shrink. And these little helping hands, guys, if I can find it. What did I do with it? Other tools that are handy are hemostats to hold stuff. Use a little piece of wood when I'm soldering to the back of the pot, just because the wood doesn't suck up the heat from my soldering iron. So if you've got to do something where it takes a decent amount of heat, you know, if you put a piece of metal on it, you know, screwdriver or what have you, that metal will suck the heat out, and you're like, man, I can't get this thing to solder. So one of these little guys you can get cheap at Harbor Freight, or I guess Harbor Freight's gone now, hardware store, just to kind of hold your wires and while you solder them. So yeah, I pre-tin everything, you know, I get it stripped and ready to go and cut, and then you always want to keep your soldering tip, you know, of course you want to stay away from that smoke. I'm talking, but mask is good, or pull your shirt up or something. But I heat up the wire. You gotta heat your whatever you're doing first, and then put the solder on, so you're not just melting, like it's not like you're melting wax onto something. So it takes a little while. I have to sit here and heat this shield up a little bit. Sometimes I give it just a little touch of solder just to get the heat transferred, and then after it gets hot enough, that solder will just wick right into the shield, and I can pre-tin it. Go away. And I'll do the same at the other end, and that's where my jack is going to go. And this wire is kind of cool for jacks because you got, you know, just 2 lugs usually, and so I'll run my hot lead into one, and then run this shield over onto that side onto the ground, and just solder that right to the ground lug, and then put some heat shrink on there, because again, this is your hot lead. So if this shielded wire touches your cord, end of your cord, or this connection, again, you're done. You got a short circuit and no signal. So I will do the same, strip this end of this guy, myself about an inch or so. Just got to be kind of careful with that, because you don't want to mess with the inside insulation. It's cloth. Got to be careful. They do make some of this wire that has a plastic insulation inside, and if you try to solder, you know, the outside of the shield to the back of a pot or something, you'll just melt right through that shield, and then you'll have another short circuit. So get the cloth wire inside, strip it. What did I do with my lighter? Got my cloth ends I get rid of. I put it in my helping hands guy and tin my ends. Again, just let it sit on there, get hot, maybe give it a little bit of a touch of solder. And then once it's hot enough, it will take the solder. Again, same thing here. Ugh. So you want to put the solder away from the iron on what you're trying to solder, and as soon as that solder wicks in and melts into the thing that you're soldering, your lug to your pot or the jack or whatever, then you're good to go. So you get a cold solder joint if you just try to melt the solder to a cold lug, wire, what have you. So I get this kind of started, and I just kind of map it out here. This is going to go here, and then I can run this around. I can show you what I'm going to do with the jack. I can put that up there. So you got one. The ground is pretty easy to see because it's the one connected to the ring, the inside of the hole, where your nut goes and everything, and then the lug that is just connected to this guy is your hot side. So, of course, you got a 50-50 chance of getting it wrong, which means there's an 80% chance of getting it wrong. So anywhere sometimes I take a little piece of 400 grit or something, and you can take a little wire brush or something, and I just kind of etch anything that I'm going to be soldering to. Just give it a little scratch and a cleaning. Do that with my lugs down here and everything too, or the back of the pot if I'm going to solder something, a ground or whatever. I always take a little piece of sandpaper, kind of give myself an etched patch so it takes the solder a little better. It cleans off the surface. These things can be a little oily, etc. from the factory. So let's see, which one do I want to do? This one? Sure. So I can get my hot end lead kind of bent. I don't really tie it in knots or anything. Bugs the crap out of me when I'm trying to redo a wiring or do something and people run the wire through the lug about a million times as if it needs to survive a hurricane or something. But I just crimp it on there. You do want a good, nice, tight physical connection between the wire and the lug. Now I got this kind of pre-soldered. Always, you know, pre-tin your tip and wipe it off. You always want this thing, especially when you're putting your soldering iron up for turning it off and you're done. Just give it a good old douse of tin. Cover it really good. So I'm going to pre-tin this ground side. Cool. And then I can bring this over. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tin my hot lead side. I got my wire in there. Like I said, it's got to get kind of hot. Give it a little bit of solder and all of a sudden you'll see it go whoop into the... Let it sit there for a while, let it be good and hot. You want a nice shiny... Ugh. So, nice shiny connection there. Means you got it good and hot. Now I can do this grounded side, which I might use a small needle nose for, or something to hold it. I can always use a little piece of leather too, or wear some gloves, and just because that shield will get kind of hot. Just about the time you get it hot enough to do what it needs to do. So I just have to put the iron in between here and get that everything good and juicy again. And I can kind of push it down to that ground side. I think that got it. So that's on there nice and tight. Oh, it is hot. Whole thing gets hot. That's how metal works, right? So now we're grounded, so that's a nice simple little circuit for your, and with one lead coming off of it for your jack. So what I want to do is, you know, that's going to kind of sit like that in there. It's going to come across this and ground where I need to ground my connection for the capacitor, and then it's going to ground to here and come into my center lug. And I want to kind of insulate in between there just for good measure. So I kind of eyeball, where is my nippers here, how much I need in between there, and then another one in between here. But make sure I do that before I start soldering things. Go through there, you. Gotta be careful if the wire's hot. It'll shrink as you're putting it on there, so I got a little bit of a, so that'll protect it if it hits that or hits the cord or anything like that. So you just need to make sure you do that because jacks get loose and spin around and all that stuff. So you can heat shrink that right down on there and it's nice tight. So what I can do is I kind of figure out where I'm going to ground this all, and I can pre-tin my shield again, basically where the ground is going to be here. Distances on here are pretty close. Might want to put my helping hands to help hold that steady. Try not to breathe. Go, oh, see, there it goes. Just kind of pre-tin that whole thing. nice little spot of tin on that shield. So then when I do the other one, this is going to be kind of shielded up here too. I kind of started it already, but it could use a little extra. See that tin just preload in there. Nice and shiny, nice and hot, nice and smoky. All right, so now I can start soldering these. So yeah, on both of these pots, the way I do them is if you're looking down on it, the right lug is gonna get grounded. There's a couple different ways you can do tone controls. Sometimes instead of just grounding that, you use the cap to go to ground, but I use the cap in between. It's gonna go from the center to the lug that the pickup's going to go into, the left lug. Or you can just do a jumper to there and then use so you can either put the capacitor before the resistor or after it, so they can be either way. They're in series. You get a capacitor and then a variable resistor. You can put the capacitor first and then just ground the resistor, or you can just do a jumper lead, straight wire, and then ground the capacitor from that lug to the back of the pot. That's what you'll see a lot of times in factory guitars because it's a little simpler, easier probably to do it. So, I don't know, the old school way is to use the capacitor as the jumper. So that's how I do it. I think it does sound better and work a little better. But play around with all that stuff as much as you like. So I want to put this down here and ground it, and ground this lug to the back of the pot. Again, just let the iron sit on there for a while. Like I said, this is a 35 watt, just plugged into the wall. Of course, you can spend all kinds of money on, but with a kind of a screwdriver tip. So it's good enough for sure. It gets you a nice shiny puddle there, and my lug is saying, so now I want to put this on there, and this is where the part of the show where I like to use my little piece of wood and hold this down. So I got that one on the back, that guy, so it's grounding both the lug of the right lug, and everything's grounded to the back of that pot. And I'm going to do the same over here. So I connected my output lead for my volume. It's going to go out and to the jack, and then everything's going to be grounded with the shield. So that's a nice, neat little thing. All I have to do is put in my pickup and the capacitor and ground the pickup, and then there's a bridge ground too that'll go to the back of one of these pots on the grounded end of the circuit, and it'll be all done. So that's a nice, neat little. So yeah, sometimes this 35 watt, it's great, but it sometimes is just weak enough that I gotta let it sit and let it get heated back up again. So I kind of put a little puddle of solder back here on the back of my pot, and got my thing pre-tinned, so all I have to do is get that to all goo together and be set. So like I said, sometimes it's good. You really want your tip to be kind of shiny. A little bit of solder on there will help transfer some of the heat. Let it sit there, let it get good and hot on the back of the pot, and start pushing this guy. Takes a little time. Get that shield on the back of the wire. Oh yeah, that felt good. And to see the puddle from the back of the pot kind of wick into the wire, then that's what we want. Nice, neat, pretty neat, you know. Could use a little more heat, but it's just enough. So, and I got this right lug shielded to the back of there, so, or grounded. So we're all grounded, and all I have to do is put my pickup in. The output's already done, and then hook in the cap, which will go from where the pickup comes in to the center lug of of the tone pot. And I got some little bit of smaller heat shrink. I can kind of shield these wires too, which is a good idea. And the leads come really long, so I don't need all that length on this guy at all, so I can pop it off. You can kind of sand these ends where you're going to be soldering it, and I can clip a couple small pieces of heat shrink. Not that it's a big deal, these should be pretty far away from anything, but just as a matter of course, looks nicer. So I'll get these in here. Now I might solder the one to the tone because that's all that is necessary. Leave this one loose for now before I, and then when I get my pickup into it, I'll solder the pickup lead and the cap into it all at once. So you don't want to get the capacitor too hot. I mean, these are pretty big capacitors. Some of those real little 1 volt, 1.5 volt guys, you might want to, then you do sometimes need a heat sink, like your hemostats or whatever, holding the wire between where you're soldering and the capacitor. That way it sucks the heat up into either your pliers or your hemostats before the heat gets into your capacitor. The tone doesn't really have an output except to ground, so the signal that's coming off of where the pickup's going in through this capacitor, which is acting as kind of a window of frequencies, only allowing the high-end frequencies basically through, and then when you turn your tone pot to ground and this center lug, the wiper, goes to ground, and whatever's coming through that capacitor gets grounded out and goes away. But as you turn over to this lug, which is not going to have anything on it, and sometimes you'll see people, they just cut that lug off because it's not used for anything, then you're kind of an open circuit with all the resistance going to ground, so whatever's coming through your capacitor doesn't go to ground and you don't lose it, so you keep your signal with the high-end frequencies. And as you turn down the potentiometer for your tone control, you're just directing whatever's coming through your capacitor to ground and shorting it out. So it's all this stuff is just simple circuits where you're just messing with things going to ground, either through a capacitor or resistor or something like that, or things not going to ground and keeping your signal as full as possible. I think I'm all wired in. Got my pickup lead wired in, and you can see that so well. So this pickup lead has 2 wires, and then it has a shield wire that kind of goes to just to the outside cover. I don't know, I grounded the white wire and put the red wire on the hot. It could go either way. There's only one pickup, so it doesn't really matter. I'm not sure exactly how these pickups were, but those wires could be swapped if you had 2 of the same, you'd want to do them the same way. But shouldn't matter with one pickup. Not worried about phasing or anything like that. And so everything's wired in. I got my bridge ground wired to my ground on my jack, and this all fits in. Holes line up pretty good. And I kind of left these loose so I could peel this plastic off. We can do a little, so basically there, we can do a little unboxing video if I can get the plastic to pull up. That little bit of plastic can take the paper off, but come here, it's gonna get that little end to come up. There you go. So, peel it off. Shiny tortoiseshell pickguard. Might have to take some of these controls up. I kind of left them. Oh crap! I was hoping that would peel up from underneath the screws, but I might have to. Hope that one did. If you leave those loose, it'll pull the plastic up from underneath the nuts, but I might have to undo them and gotta get that plastic out from underneath. Ta-da! So there's our tortoiseshell pickguard. Matches pretty good. It's a little better than so that's gonna be on there, and zoom. Cool. looking good. I think he's gonna like that. Found some funky old, I got all these old radio knobs that I got from this old electronics place. Maybe a couple of those cool funky red with the brushed chrome. Will be kind of cool. He'll dig that. He loves all that funky stuff. So total hipster, this guy. So cool. I like it. All right, we're together. Pretty cool. Flashy radio knobs. Kind of big, but it's kind of a small instrument. But it's kind of a power chord guitar. Pretty fun. Cool. I think you'll like it.